It's tough to conserve natural resources when they're your best shot at making a living. And that's the reality for most people living in rural India.
Sometimes what happens is that because of the constraints they account a living, some of these larger concerns of equity, sustainability may not come very naturally to them because everybody is in a struggle to meet their livelihoods.
But there have been a lot of experiments that show that communities can be stewards of their land, water, and ecosystems if they get the right support.
पण आता मग म्हणजे काय लागलं मित्रकीड सुद्धा असू शकतं शत्रुकीड कोणतं मित्रकीड कोणतं त्याच्यामुळे झालं.
So what does it really take to help communities preserve nature while still getting what they need? And is it really all in their hands? Or are there larger forces at play? Welcome to In Our Nature, a podcast by the Ecobari Collaborative that uncovers what we need to do to protect ecosystems so that they can protect us. I'm your host, Isha, and in this series, we explore our deep connections with the natural world and how restoring nature can help us adapt to climate change. Ecobari is a shared initiative of 9 founding partners and is convened by the Watershed Organization Trust. Our 5th episode explores the role local governance plays in protecting nature and what tools communities need to be able to effectively manage their natural resources.
My name is KJ Joy. Generally, people call me Joy. I'm part of an organization called the Society for Promoting Participative Ecosystem Management, SOPPECOM to be brief.
Joy, a founding member and senior fellow at SOPPECOM, has over 30 years of experience working with communities across rural Maharashtra. He says the first step to empowering a community is recognizing that it isn't just one big blob.
Communities also need to be disaggregated. A community is not one, there are different type of fault lines within the community. Now, for example, there can be a richer farmer versus a very marginal or agricultural labor. There are also community, or there could be around the caste, there could be different fault lines, or gender and patriarchy, or ethnicity. So I think we should be sensitive to this type of fault lines because these are all come with the hierarchies and power structures. So when we talk about community empowerment or communities participating, we should be able to ask this question: which community is this? And are we preparing a level playing field for all these communities because they are at different ends of either resource endowment or access to resources?
So to help people manage their resources better, we have to acknowledge what it means to share them fairly. Joy gives the example of public irrigation systems, which usually draw water from rivers and dams through irrigation channels.
SOPPECOM worked in a village called Kudawadi in Usmanabad district. So there is a particular medium irrigation project called Bori Dam. Though the dam was functional, the irrigation had started. For the first 10 to 12 years, people from the Kudawadi village, which is in the tail end of the command area, never got access to water.
Often, the water coming through these systems gets used up by farmers who live closer to the source of the water. By the time we get to the last few villages in the area, the water has pretty much dried up. SOPPECOM agreed to help solve this problem by creating a water users association, which brings together all the people using water from a particular irrigation system. But on one condition. Once the village had access to water, they had to manage it equitably. But what does that actually mean?
We did not go with a blueprint saying that this is equitable access to water and you have to abide by this. We put different experiences before the people. We talked to them about, let's say, Pani Panchayat experience where every household will get access to, let's say, 2.5 acre. That is 1 hectare of, 2 seasonal irrigation, sugarcane, etc. But interestingly, they listened to us about all these experiences, but they chose their own option.
Joy talks about Pani Panchayat, a movement spearheaded by Vilasrao Salunke in Maharashtra to help communities better manage their water, which was a great source of learning and inspiration for him. Back in Kudawadi, the villagers eventually agreed to a system where everyone gets enough water to grow 1 hectare of crops. If there's additional water, everyone gets to grow a little bit more, and 15% of the water is always reserved for landless people. So it's clear that communities, when brought together, can find effective ways to govern their resources. And the successes in these kinds of programs have snowballed beyond isolated pockets to now being enshrined in policy.
In 2005, we will see that there's a policy and there's an act make it compulsory that in any public irrigation systems, especially surface irrigation systems, the water users or the farmers have to form their own water association even to get access to water. So in fact, we did a very pioneering work in reforming public irrigation systems through the people's own participation.
A key part of all this is the approach that SOPPECOM took, to leave the final decision to the community.
So this is a choice which people made. No, we did not impose that you have to have strict, everybody should get access to 1,000 cubic meter of water or anything. But we just put different information, experiences before the people, and people choose. So I would say that when we talk about community empowerment, community participation, community-led governance of resources and things, I think the most important thing to me is how do communities make informed choices between different options. Sometimes what happens is that because of the constraints they account in living, some of these larger concerns of equity, sustainability may not come very naturally to them because everybody is in a struggle to meet their livelihoods.
So what does the process actually look like of getting people to see the bigger picture?
What we do is that we generally try to bring all the social sections together, including women, Dalits, agricultural laborers, and other farmers together into discussions. We also do research and other things, data gathering, how the present water use or the land use or cropping is taking place. Now, for example, if a larger farmer is going to have a much deeper bore well, it can impact somebody else.
Once they have this data, they show it to the people, and based on this, people make decisions on how to share.
So the only thing is that if the majority of the people in the village are with this idea, then probably you can put pressure so that everybody comes on numbers.
But of course, it isn't always straightforward. Like Joy said at the start, the community isn't one, and overcoming those differences can be a real challenge.
Of course, this whole unequal structures within the system is a big challenge because very often you need to build consensus within the communities if you have to really manage resource properly and things. If you have to get these marginalized social sections like whether women, Dalits, agriculture, you need people who are capable of working with those sections and bring them into this.
So you need local leaders from marginalized groups who have a strong voice and can bring the community together. Very often, there are also local groups that have been working to mobilize marginalized people, and they make great allies.
We very often work with the local organizations and movements who has got a good social base. I think it's important to realize that unless you are socially rooted in that context, probably, you can't just parachute there for 5 years and work and get out and things. There's a larger commitment, there's a larger involvement which is involved. Because then there's an agency, even if you withdraw from a particular context, there's an agency which will take forward what you have been able to do there and things.
Joy talked a lot about water and how communities can come together to manage it through groups like water user associations. In Jalna district of Maharashtra, WOTR has been working with farmer producer companies, or FPCs, as another community group that can influence the behavior of its members towards more sustainable practices. I spoke to Taratai Pawar, a member of Krishiyug farmer producer company and part of a pioneering local women's group working to produce organic fertilizers and pesticides.
आपल्याला आपण कसं गोळ्या जास्त झाल्या तर माणसाला धोका होतो तसं जमिनीला सुद्धा होऊ शकतो.
Tara talks about how the overuse of synthetic pesticides and fertilizers was rampant in her community because farmers in her village felt that using more chemical inputs would result in a higher yield. But, in her words, just like a man can die by taking too much medicine, so too can the soil.
पहिले सुरुवातीला आम्हाला एका एकरामध्ये 20 क्विंटल कापूस व्हायचा. आता अर्ध्यावर आला, 10 क्विंटल व्हायला लागला. कारण त्याचा कोणी विचारच केला नाही. पण आमच्या डोक्यात आलं कारण आपण याला खत जास्त सोडलं त्याच्यामुळे आपली माती खराब झाली.
Tara noticed that the production of cotton from her field had declined to half of what it used to be. At the same time, WOTR was working with Krishiyug to help its members transition to more sustainable farming practices. And through this process, she started to attribute this reduction in yield to the overuse of chemical inputs.
पहिले काय होतं शत्रुकीड मित्रकीड म्हणजे काय माहितीच नव्हतं शेतात असून सुद्धा. मित्रकीड असलं तरी म्हणायचं मीच म्हणत होते की आपल्या शेतात लय कीड झालं औषधी आणा. पण आता म्हणजे काय लागलं मित्रकीड सुद्धा असू शकतं. शत्रुकीड कोणतं मित्रकीड कोणतं याची ओळख झाली.
She also learned about friendly bugs, which she calls Mitra Kida, that can improve yields through pollination or controlling other pests. This helped her make better decisions about the kinds of pesticides she uses on her farm to prevent wiping out all her little friends.
आहे 10 ग्रुप आहे आमच्या गावामध्ये 10 गट आहे. त्याच्यामधल्या प्रत्येक गटातील 2-3 महिला अशा करून 15 महिलांचा ग्रुप आहे आमचा.
Since there were already a bunch of women's groups active in the area, WATR engaged them to form a smaller group of around 15 women dedicated to making organic fertilizers and pesticides. She says that this was a pretty big help since it's labor intensive to produce these inputs, and having a group makes it much easier than having to do it alone.
कारण आता त्रास पण नाही आहे, म्हणजे घरी करायचं जीवावर येत होतं शेतकऱ्याला.
Tara noticed that using organic inputs meant her veggies would last longer and taste better. And she wasn't the only one. Her neighbors also realized that her onions and garlic lasted much longer than theirs did and looked much fresher. It also reduced her costs.
आणि 1 वर्षाच्या जास्त म्हणजे टिकले कांदे पण आणि लसूण पण खराब नाही झाला. आणि ही रासायनिक खत आणि केमिकलचं औषध फवारणी केलीच नाही. त्याच्यामुळं म्हणजे दवाखान्यात जो खर्च व्हायचा आमचा तो पण कमी झाला. आणि जी चव होती मेन म्हणजे जी आपण हे खताना त्यानं औषधांना असली ना त्याच्यापेक्षा ही चव चांगली लागते.
Tara starts to send around photos of her crops and invites other farmers to see her fields and yields, to see the difference between using organic and chemical inputs. And she's invested in getting more people to take up natural farming practices, especially because selling these inputs is important for the growth of her business.
आमच्या शेतामध्ये येऊन फोटो दाखवतो त्यांना की किती फरक आहे बा, ह्या शेतामध्ये आम्ही वापरलं त्या शेतामध्ये नाही वापरलं तर फरक पहा. ते विचारतात कारण हा एकच वाण आहे आणि जमीन पण एकच आहे, मग याच्यामध्ये फरक कसा काय. तर आम्ही सांगतो बा याला 10 ड्रममधलं औषध वापरलेलं आहे, आम्ही गांडूळ खत टाकलेलं आहे आणि याला रासायनिक वापरलेलं आहे.
Through the work of the FPC, she's seen a pretty significant change in her community already. She says that 60% of people in her area grow vegetables for their own consumption without any chemical inputs, and 40% are transitioning overall to organic farming.
जे घरचे भाजीपाला ते असलं ना तर 60% लोक म्हणजे ज्ञान मिळालं त्यांना की जैविकच खायचं, खायपुरतं 60% आणि तसं पण 40% जैविक शेती करतात आमच्या गावात.
So Joy's example points more towards the equitable sharing of a common resource like water, while Tara's is about how community action can inspire better practices, like preserving soil health, but both draw on common denominators, like working with existing community groups or local organizations and providing the right information to support decision making. But the buck doesn't stop here.
When you talk about local governance, we should also see that all the issues cannot be maybe solved at the community or the local level. There are macro level issues which are happening, which has a direct bearing on the micro or the local, what the local communities do. Now, for example, the type of water policy you have, or the type of forest policy you have, or the land use policy which you have, or the type of macro development in terms of, if you see in Maharashtra, whole lot of water is going out to the industries and the urban, drinking water, domestic water and things.
If a community is working successfully to manage its water, but a factory comes up in the same geography, suddenly the water use and availability in the area will change drastically. And that's something they've got no control over.
You need to walk on both the legs. One, firmly rooted in the community where you are working and try to mobilize, and also on the other hand, you need to engage with other larger forces which may be detrimental to the local communities in terms of resource extraction, where does the resource go, etc., and the larger political economy, ecology.
This means that it's not just about building governance at the community level. We also have to reform the way we govern natural resources as a whole.
Water is an interconnected resource. It has got different scales. So you need, for example, what you talk about a village level institution or a micro watershed level institution, it has to be connected with even other different layers of institutions. For example, the basin scale. Because whatever you do in a particular place, like a micro watershed village, can impact the rest of the basin. Now, if you're going to over-extract water in a particular upper part of the basin or something, it can definitely have impact on the flows downstream and things.
Joy mentions the basin scale, which essentially means looking at water use across an entire river basin, say the Brahmaputra or the Narmada. These are huge areas, including the entire region that a river and all its tributaries cover on their path. Looking at any one piece within the puzzle would be incomplete because of how interconnected it all is.
When you talk about ecosystem-based governance and other things, then there is the issue of boundaries coming in. Because all our administrative things works on geographical boundaries like a district, a taluka or a village, etc. Resources don't know these boundaries. But even in a interstate river thing, one state doesn't talk to the other state. Whether it is Krishna, Kaveri, Godavari, or any of these disputed places, we are not even created such institutional spaces which is cutting across this. So we need to rethink about some of these boundaries which are created, because resource boundaries are different.
This is a major sticking point. We can't effectively manage our resources unless we accept the reality that they're interconnected. The Krishna River is not going to see the difference between Maharashtra and Karnataka's state borders. But the amount of water reaching Karnataka depends on how Maharashtra uses water upstream. So what's the solution? There's an interesting phrase that Joy uses here.
I don't know whether it will sound jargonistic, but called a nested institutional framework.
A nested institutional framework essentially means that you have an institution right at the top that's responsible for overseeing water flow of the entire river basin, which cuts across states and other administrative boundaries. And that institution is closely connected to a number of smaller institutions that go down to the individual village level to keep tabs on how water is being used, when and where. And, he says, they all need to talk to each other.
When we talk about governance, we talk about accountability, and very often the local institutions are supposed to be accountable to the higher level institution. That is the way it functions. But here we need to talk about reverse accountability, saying that even the higher level or the supra-local institution need to be accountable to the institution which is below that. So unless we build in this type of reverse accountability, then very often it's the higher level institutions which take decisions, and these people are only to just abide by what is.
But this thinking is more than just the creation of government bodies. It's also about how we see our natural resources as a whole. And it gives us a sense of humility, because we have to play by nature's rules, not by the rules and boundaries that we've created. And closely related to this is the idea of environmental flows.
There is an increasing sensitivity even among the various departments and things about environmental flows or ecological flows, because we find if you look at any of the latest water policies, they do talk about environmental flow as an important thing. I mean, even in the state of Odisha has in their water policy, the second priority, like every policy, whether it's the national or the state level, you have a priority of water use. For example, the first priority is generally given to drinking and domestic water. Second, maybe to agriculture and industry, etc., etc. So there, I think the Odisha for the first time talked about the second priority to be given to, let's say, environmental flow. I mean, certain type of water need to be kept in the rivers as untapped or unbound. It should flow so that it can meet some of the ecosystem needs, the riparian, maybe the vegetation, the fish, all type of things. So I think there's an increasing recognition of this.
Ecological flows are the amount of water that needs to flow in the river for the health and survival of the ecosystem itself, which is just starting to be recognized by policymakers across India. And this kind of thinking is important because it shifts the focus away from simply thinking about human needs to actually seeing humans as part of a bigger picture.
I think probably it can be used as a peg to anchor some of the concerns we have about this whole large dams. The whole philosophy is saying that every drop of water need to be harvested and put into human use. It's a very anthropocentric way of looking at rest of nature or rivers and things. So this whole maxim saying that any drop of water going to the sea is a waste. It comes from that mindset.
Because at the end of the day,
we are part of nature. So I say humans are the rest of nature. Otherwise, people have a tendency to that we are outside somewhere. It's not. Yeah.
And Joy says this is even more important in the era of climate change, where causes and impacts can often be spread out, and boundaries start to fray.
the biggest lesson which we need to learn from climate change is the crisis is that this, because climate change operates at a scale at very different, and there I think then this whole issue of cooperation across boundaries is an important thing we need to really this. So I think climate change is a wake-up call for all of us to go beyond these boundaries which are created here.
Thanks for listening to In Our Nature. If you like this episode, please share it far and wide to help us get the word out there. We're super grateful for your support and your attention. Ecobari stands for Ecosystem-Based Adaptation for Resilient Incomes. Our collaborative aims to spotlight and enable solutions that build climate resilience and sustainable livelihoods by restoring, protecting, and enhancing nature. It's a shared initiative of 9 founding partners with diverse areas of expertise, including rural development, action research, sustainable finance, nature conservation, and policy engagement. To learn more about Ecobari, visit our website at www.ecobari.org.